Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter. In this edition of Dig It, we chat to Fellow of the Institute of Horticulture and founder of the Association of Professional Landscapers, Alan Sargent. It's a first for Dig It. We get to chat with a proper landscape gardener who over 5 decades has won countless awards, including over 60 RHS, Royal Horticultural Society medals at Chelsea, Hampton Court, Tatton Park and Gardeners World Live. Initially a project manager and constructor and increasingly a designer as well as a builder. Alan, a really warm welcome to Dig It. It's a delight for us both to be able to chat to you today.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Delighted. I haven't seen you for a long time, Chris. Back at Chelsea, must be mid-90s.
It was
It's
indeed.
great to talk to you again.
Yes, it's really nice to have you on board the podcast. And I'll say it's a first, isn't it, Peter? We've got a garden designer.
Never had a garden designer yet. It's brilliant.
Well, I've never really referred to myself as a garden designer, strange as that might sound. I've been a builder of gardens, and I suppose because I started constructing gardens long before I started to design them, I've never really thought of myself as a garden designer, which is quite strange. I've done 36 RHS show gardens, but my hat really is gardener. Mm-hmm. Landscape gardener, garden designer, whatever. But gardener is my basic line.
Excellent. Not a poet then? Because we've heard you've been doing some poetry as well in your lifetime.
Well, I've written quite a few books. They're mainly, if you like, management style books for the industry. But I wrote a book recently which is called Confessions of a Gardener, which it's a talk I've been giving for donkey's years to garden designers and societies and so on, gardeners clubs. And so, just one of those things. I have been writing poetry for the last sort of 3 or 4 years because I could see a situation, and in my head I start singing a song, a well-known tune, a tune that I know well, shall we say, and then I put words to it. So if you actually look at all of my poems, like the Ballad of an Ancient Gardener and Designer's Lament and Head Gardener's Lament, I Met a Man Who Knows a Man, and so on, they're all actually, you could sing them to tunes. I've never tried doing that, so I wouldn't inflict the public. But and they just put them as a bit of fun. And to be fair, they've gone down very well, very popular, shall we say.
Yeah, they've definitely struck a chord.
I'm not a Wordsworth.
They're very good, though. They're very apt and lovely descriptive poems, I think.
Yeah. So
well, that's what I like to do. Yeah.
Yeah, Alan, where do we start then? Did you always want to become a builder of beautiful gardens? Did you have a particular career path at a young age? Please enlighten us.
Well, far from it, really. I was born and raised on a farm, and then when I was 18, I joined the police. Okay. Police cadet first, and then a policeman, constable sergeant, and I was stationed in Chichester, and then I got seduced by London and moved to the Met as a BC in the Met, but I hated living in London, so that was the end of my police career after about 3 years. So the only industry in our little village, where we lived, little hamlet near Petworth, was in fact horticulture. So being jobless, which is quite strange, you don't ever expect to be jobless, I took up a career, as it were, in horticulture, working with that particular little firm, and I never looked back.
Indeed, yes. So I mean, we've got a copy of your book, Confessions of a Gardener, and we've really enjoyed reading it. It's a lovely dip in, dip out book. That's what I like these days. Whether it's a short attention spans, I don't know, Alan, but it's a great read, and well done with that. Can I just ask about perhaps your strangest work brief? I mean, reading through your book, you've had some interesting commissions in your time, but.
I think the strangest, the weirdest one. In the early 80s, I built a lovely garden in Brighton with a brilliant garden designer called Robin Williams. Now, he was one of my heroes. Now, part of this garden was a big Japanese-style garden. It was a large shallow pool with several islands, which we created as part of the design. And finally forgot about the job. It had been finished for many years. And I had a phone call from a landscape architect to go down. Of course, I recognised the name of the property. And when I arrived there, what had happened was the house next door had some work done on the roof. And one of the scaffold chaps had dropped a pole. But had glanced off the scaffold and then speared this pond liner. Well, in the real world, you would get in there, and after maybe a day's work, drain the pond down and so on. You just repair it. You repair the liner, not a problem at all. But this particular client was such a pedant, is the right word for it. He wanted the most peculiar thing. He had this landscape architect arrive, and my brief was, in fact, to take all of the existing garden away and bring it back. And in order to do that, we had to photograph everything and then mark it out into square meters. And they wanted it all palletized, removed off site, and then brought back again with a new liner underneath. You can imagine the amount of work involved in that.
Yes.
It was just absolutely so stupid, really. And for the sake of, £500, they could have a repair. And you're talking about at least £100,000 to do this particular project. I just said to him, you're mad. He didn't appreciate that. I said, just think about what you're asking me to do, There's no way the insurance company going to pay for that.
No.
So that really was the weirdest one. You're never going to be that. Take away the garden and bring it back exactly as it was, with nothing different.
One word. No.
Excellent.
And thinking about, you obviously worked on a lot of domestic gardens, Alan, over your time. Have you had anything which is, noticeable? The largest, the biggest, something which has really pushed your skills to the maximum?
I've done a lot of domestic property gardens, big gardens as well as smaller ones. I mean, I've done some quite major schemes into commercial schemes. I did the new music schools at Eton College, for example. Eton Boys School. But probably the biggest domestic garden was a wonderful place in Bishop's Avenue in North London. It was just such a massive project. I had 29 chaps on site with me, and there must have been 60 people working on site, including swimming pool engineers and builders and so on. And it was a crazy place in a way for a domestic garden, because everything was just so huge. And it felt like working in a town, but actually in the garden. So many people, so much activity. But it was a fantastic job. It worked out in the end. But we had lots of strange things going on with the designers and so on. They just kept changing their minds. I mean, massively changing their mind. But they're paying for it. They pay for it every time. They wanted something built and didn't like it, and then they had it taken away and then replaced with something else. But they just kept on paying. So that was a major project.
I suppose they're the customers you want, aren't they? The ones that pay the bills.
They can drive you mad, though, because you put so much effort into trying to do something really well, really skillful.
Yeah.
And then having completed it, and then have it sort of trashed. It's almost like building Chelsea show gardens, except we know they're going to get trashed at Chelsea, but not in a domestic garden. I suppose in a way, like, I never thought about that before. It'd be like building a glossy garden in a domestic property and then taking it away. That's because the chap changed his mind. That was a bit weird.
Gosh.
And have you ever been mistaken for anyone else? Any mix-ups whilst you've been working?
Me myself?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I've had some mistaken identity type jobs. We had one particular one which was quite strange. It was the wrong address.
Oh, right.
I mean, that was definitely a mix-up. There was a row of new bungalows, or newish bungalows, in Haywards Heath.
Yep.
And all the houses were literally identical. So we arrived on site. We knew that the customer wasn't going to be in, because we were told that. And we went in the back garden, and they had a fairly plain patio, concrete slabs, and we just ripped them up and put them in a skip, and that was it. And just about to clear off site at sort of 4:30, and then the customers come home, and we thought, oh, good, they're going to be very pleased with what we've done today. Wrong house.
Oh,
wrong
no.
House. The garden designer had given us the wrong number. And so it was obviously very embarrassing. I had to replace the garden. And then it sort of went on from one of those comedy of errors things, because having got the right house and met the right client, the designer, who to remain nameless, had chosen the wrong product. And so we'd ordered the wrong product, because it had all been checked off and agreed and paid for. But because the customer wanted to have natural concrete slabs, and to his mind they were grey.
Right.
And the designer thought natural was going to be buff, so we bought in maybe £800 worth of the wrong slabs.
Whoops.
So that was so it's just a comedy of errors. That one just went on and on and on, but all because basically the designer had given us the wrong information and hadn't made sure that his customer knew what was happening. Which I learned a lot of lessons from that particular job, shall we say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check and double check, I suspect, isn't it? And yeah. Alan, you in your book you have a sort of saying, if it involves water, it will go wrong.
Well, this is an old landscape sign, because we know that every single time we put in a pond or a water feature, it doesn't go wrong. But of course, you've got capillary action and transpiration and natural splashing and so on. So yes, you're going to have situations, no matter how many times you tell the customer that this is like an artificial feature and you will need to keep it topped up. But we just have that phrase: if it involves water, it will go wrong. But there's one particular chap I remember, he's an American lawyer in St George's Hill. Yeah, where do I begin? We built this really, really natural-looking water feature, which was basically a pond in an embankment.
Right.
The water appeared to come out from under some rhododendrons and disappeared from the raised pool, as it were, and just dropped down into a hidden tank underneath. So it's completely recycling. It's quite a traditional way of building these projects. And so it was lovely. And after about 3-4 weeks, had the phone call from the lady and said, I think the pond's leaking. So I went and had a look at it, and the water had dropped down by about 3 inches, which is a bit worrying. So I checked it out very, very carefully, and I topped it up, and I said, there you are, it must be fine now. And so I could see nothing wrong. The next day, the same problem. And after about the 5th day, then I had a husband on the phone, and he was furious. So I don't know what to do, because when I go there, the pond's dropped down again, I top it up. It never never went down more than that sort of 3 inches. So anyway, I decided to start doing a bit of creative thinking, and I put a few pencil marks on the rocks to show where the water was when I left it, and then what it was like the next day. So St George's Hill is one of those strange places where you have heavy security and not allowed to work after 6 o'clock in the evening, because we don't want any noise and so on for the residents. So I managed to get permission from the security, who I knew very well, to sort of sit in the garden and try to figure out what's going on. And so I'm sitting there about 7:30 in the evening, 7:45, and suddenly this chap came through the hedge from next door carrying 2 large watering cans and started to fill up the watering cans. So of course I challenged him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm ever so sorry." He said, I just moved in next door last month. He said, "I've got a greenhouse at the bottom of the garden, but there's no tap, so I thought I'd borrow some from your stream." Because the chap thought it was a natural stream. He was taking water but not realising the problems he was causing. But so anyway, I emailed the lawyer and to explain to him, but I never got a reply. He just totally blanked me. So I thought, well, no. Yes, I have found your mystery. I've solved your mystery, and it was not my fault. And I must have gone back 10 times. It drives you mad, what is going on? But anyway.
That's good.
That was a strange story, yeah.
Definitely. I can remember I did a waterfall once for a customer, and it was an old waterfall that was built out of limestone, and the frost had got into the rock and it had all crumbled and what have you. And it looked lovely when I started, other than it was all falling apart. And then we rebuilt it for them, and I thought I'd done quite a good job. Mm-hmm. And the customer turned around at the end of the job and was like, "Well, it's all new rock. It doesn't look natural anymore." And I'm like, well, what do you expect? You've asked us to rebuild a rockery with new rock. Yeah. Do you want us to paint it? And sure enough, sort of a few months later, it had grown some algae over it, and it all looked a far better map. But yeah. It is always fun working with people, isn't it?
This is why I make sure that everything's in black and white and clearly understood, and why you can get disconcerted by things like the chap coming from next door and pinching the water.
Alan, obviously with our followers on Dig It, I'm sure they would love to glean some advice on a little bit of garden design tips. What would be your main three things to consider when you're looking at your garden and you maybe want to give it a revamp, a redesign? What do you think of the three?
Well, I think it obviously depends on how long you've lived there, but let's take a new garden. You've moved into a new garden. You're going to design a new garden from your old one. Three things to consider. One is very important nowadays is water movement. Water movement across the land. Now, where we live, I live in Sussex and I work across the south of England, and we've got a great deal of clay there. But in fact, if you just spend out the money, about £150, and get a hydrological survey done of your garden, which includes the area beyond your garden. So you give the survey people your address, and then they build up a picture using Google Earth and a thing called LIDAR, and they can actually map the way the water moves across your property, and also your properties beyond. So you get an idea really if you're going to have any issues with drainage. And this is something which is fairly recent we can do in private gardens. But you really need to know your site. So there's no good designing a garden if you don't know your site. So that's the number one thing to consider. The other really is how long do you intend to be there? Because if you're going to want to sell the garden in say 5 years' time, in your scheme of things, then you want the garden to look good in 5 years' time. If it's going to be there, you're going to be there for the rest of your life. You need to look at things. You need to look at your age, the age group used in the garden. It's got to be fit for purpose, shall we say, fit for your purpose. So I think there's more than top three things all lumped together. But think about what you're doing. Don't just design something just because you think it looks pretty, because you can become completely disenchanted with your efforts.
Yeah, and you can very easily become a slave to your garden if you get those things wrong. If you put if you don't put the low maintenance elements in, you can be forever going out there pruning, trimming, planting, replanting. I suppose.
Yeah. That's a phrase I always avoid is low maintenance, because what is low maintenance?
Yeah.
People expect no maintenance, and of course that's just not possible.
Well, that's it. And have you noticed, sort of, I know, having read your book, it's obvious that you've worked all around the world. Have you noticed that some of the different countries have different attitudes towards the garden and the lifespan of the garden?
Well, really, the UK, Britain, is head and shoulders above anywhere else in the world. And I seriously mean that. It's not just because I'm a British show garden designer, garden designer. America, they're big and they're bold and so on, but they're mainly for hard-wearing plants. So you'd have, for example, your lawn wouldn't be the nice fine fescues that we have. You'd have like a thing called Kentucky bluegrass, which you would never ever have in this country because it's very sharp and it's fit for purpose. It's fit for their particular region. I've worked I haven't done actually work in America, but I worked a lot, fun enough, in Russia. Around about the turn of the century, several projects in St. Petersburg and Moscow. So you have to work with what you've got, and you have to work with what will work in that area. So it's no good looking at British plant schedules when you're working in Moscow or Gibraltar, Spain, France, Belgium, Germany, Italy. I've worked all over the place. You look at what works there. You don't try and impose your own plants and your own planting ideas on foreign soil.
Yeah, because I guess palm trees don't do too well in St. Petersburg, do they?
No.
That's good. Excellent. And you've worked with some very famous people. I mean, the late Prince Philip and Princess Alexandra.
I haven't worked with them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I have. I've met them.
Okay.
Met them, obviously, at Chelsea, mainly at Chelsea, but obviously you wait until you're approached, shall we say, before you open discussions with somebody like Prince Philip. But he was an absolute comedian. He really was, to my mind. He just had a wonderful, dry sense of humour, and he was really good for a chuckle. And we meet all of the family there really, and they've each got their own way that they like to go about the shows. Others, like Princess Alexandra, well, I met her on several occasions because she's the patron of the London Association for the Blind, which is now the I forget, they've changed their name now to something else, but she was the blind patron, and so I met her quite a few times. And when I retired from doing show gardens, she presented me with an RHS bowl, which is a great fun, a rose bowl. Which, really nice relationships when they obviously recognise you when they come round. Yeah.
Excellent. And you've done a few gardens for the blind, haven't you?
I've done I don't know, about 8 to 9 show gardens for the blind. That was the London Association for Blind, Action for Blind People. That was the other company, the other charity. They were fascinating because I just refused to try and just follow rote. It's always held that a garden for blind people, the disabled people, you've got to pander to their disability.
Yep.
I refused to do that, and I worked with some very interesting people, and I listened to what they're saying. And one elderly lady, blind lady, she said to me that my nightmare garden is half an acre of grass. I have no idea where I am. And so getting all this feedback all the time. My favourite garden of all was a garden I designed for children, and it was wonderful, I thought, because the reaction from these 3 children. I worked with them. I asked them what they wanted.
Yeah.
And this young girl, about 7 or 8 years old, she said she'd always wanted a swing. So I had that in my mind because they're not allowed to have swings because obviously they're dangerous in their schools. So I designed a garden. So I went against everything, and so instead of having tactile, I had tactile, a big tactile raised bed, but it was full of volcanic ash. There's nothing more evil to handle than volcanic rock. And the children loved it. They couldn't stop touching it because it wasn't tactile, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't smooth.
So sharp and nasty,
They're fascinated by it. But the swing, I think, was the highlight because I designed it in the corner of the garden. It had a big pergola, triangular pergola. And so if you can visualise a triangular pergola with a swing hanging from it. So instead of using ropes, I used chains, which I got from an agricultural engineer's agricultural company.
Yep.
And so these were spread at the top and then lowered and then narrowed down for the seat. So you could swing, but you were restricted to your lateral movement. And I then put a big bungee underneath the seat so you could go backwards and forwards, but you were restricted. So you couldn't swing out and kick somebody else. But you see, you get all of the sensation of a swing, but within a reason. And this little girl just sat there and she cried her eyes out. And I thought, well, that's worth any gold medal to me.
Wow.
But even got better still because David Bellamy came onto the garden. And I had a big pile of what we called dinosaurs' eggs, which were large, huge glacier boulders.
Okay.
And they were resined together so they couldn't rock or move. So it was a big solid mound of rocks. And so you could clamber over them because they were really, really cold. They're like a marble type. And they felt so pleasant to lay on, sprawl over and so on. So I've got a photograph of David Bellamy sitting on the top of this pile of rocks with his 3 children at his feet, and he's crying his eyes out. And I thought that this is worth all the medals in the world. You can have enormous fun doing these projects.
Yeah, and fantastic memories, Alan, by the sounds of it too. I was going to say, Alan, how has your job changed over the years? Has it all moved, for the better, or what's your current feelings about AI? As that's obviously a big contender in our.
How have things changed? How do you mean?
Well,
because you've got so many changes in materials. I think it's probably the biggest change in our industry. Is the new materials, the new porcelain, the new artificial grass, the new. But these are old products, but they've now been reduced in thickness.
Okay.
So that you have, like in 1990, say, you had you used the Indian sandstone, and they were 30 to 35 mil thick, and they were solid rigid slabs. Nowadays, the same product is exactly the same. It's the same Indian sandstone, but it's now 20 mil, and it flexes, and so you have to work using a different logic. You have to stick the paving down using all sorts of resins and mastics and so on to get the same job. But it's landscaping now is far more technical than it was 50 years ago. Far more technical.
Okay, that's interesting. And like the foundations and the sort of stuff that you never see, but goes on underneath the products.
Yeah, they've all changed because traditionally, again, going back to the days 50 years ago, you had York stone and sandstone and quarry tiles and so on. You'd always put them on a concrete raft,
right?
And everything was impermeable. But today we have to use permeable because of what they call the sustainable drainage regulations, the SUDS regs as they're called. So everything has to be permeable. So now you've got thin materials. We have a permeable base, which is what they call MOT type 1. It's basically planings that go underneath road building. So the water percolates down, and then the jointing material you use to fill the gaps between the slabs also has to be permeable. So everything now is permeable or totally impermeable. And the problems that can come by mixing the two are massive because water has to drain freely through paving nowadays. The construction methods have changed. That's the biggest one, I suppose. New techniques where we use lasers a lot now because instead of using a spirit level or the old water level as I used to use, it's only done with lasers nowadays.
Yeah. But I having used them myself, that I do think they're a little bit easier because you can now do a level across 10, 15 meters rather than what you used to have to do with lots of little levels.
Well, I used to use a water level, real old-fashioned, the clear pipe with the water level.
Okay.
Strange thing, but the beauty of the water level, which we have not got time to discuss now, is that you start off at the datum point, so you'd measure down, you fill a 3/4-inch pipe full of water, so you can see the water, and then you balance the two, put an elastic band around both so that you balance the two, holding two ends.
Yeah.
You can have 50-meter length, longest I used to have. So you fix one end so that you knew where the water was in relation to the pipe because you put an elastic band at that point.
Yeah.
And then you could carry this thing around the garden. And you go around from the front garden to the back garden, around the corners. You didn't have to have a sight line. You just then measure down from the elastic band to wherever you want to go, and then put a peg in there to get your level.
Wow.
My God.
Real old-fashioned stuff. This is Roman stuff. I know they didn't have plastic pipes.
I was going to say, that's a fantastic technique. I've not heard of that one before. That's brilliant.
Well, the beauty is you can use it on your own.
Yeah.
You don't have to have somebody holding the other end of the laser.
That sounds true. Yeah. Alan, we've just briefly mentioned about the charity gardens you've obviously helped to create. What about wanting to, be more creative with our own gardens with, sensory design sort of methods?
Your own sensory design?
Yeah.
I would, obviously, the first thing I'd say is, why do you need a sensory garden? What are you being sensitive to? So if you want, be creative with your own sensory garden, you need to say, well, what am I trying to be sensorized for? If it's for sight or for hearing and so on. So you design around your own needs, your own requirements.
For sure. Yeah.
So you can get as creative as you like.
You can indeed, I suppose. That's it. I mean, we do get...
Well, let's give you a little example. One very elderly lady, she loved her garden, but she couldn't get out. She couldn't get outside at all. She just sat in a wheelchair indoors. So the garden I designed for her had lots of different sounds for different things. And these were just not chime bells or anything, but just rustling bamboo leaves and so on. But I'd made it so that the garden could be changed using containers and palletized elements. That you could change the garden 3 or 4 times a year to give her a lovely garden all year round. So So you can be creative with somebody who's actually a captive viewer, and you can move the garden around and always give a great vista.
Yeah,
brilliant idea.
Good, yeah.
And who were your luminaries?
You shouldn't invite these people on your program, should you? I've got a head full of ideas. You know, I'm 76 years old and my head's still bursting with ideas.
Good to hear. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, brilliant. And who gave you inspiration, and who were your luminaries in the world of landscape gardening?
Inspiration? Well, individuals. I think I don't necessarily have any. I mean, Robin Williams. He was the main designer. He's brilliant man. But it was the influence of some people. I see particular garden designers who bring an influence to like the show gardens, which are then copied by the public and by fashion.
Yeah.
I think definitely number one, Robin Williams. Another great character is a guy called Mark Gregory. Now, Mark Gregory is an unbelievable character. He's designed and built well over 100 RHS show guns. I've done 61. He's left me for dead. I'll never catch him. But his stuff is really big. He's well known recently for the Yorkshire Garden at Chelsea. But Mark Gregory is just like a legend in the industry.
Mm. And Alan, what have been the sort of fads and fashions design wise you've come across the years? I mean, they do say fashions and fads do come round in circles. Are we going through a new phase at the moment, or?
Fashions design wise, well, the moment, of course, that everything is involved around the wildflowers and rewilding and so on, which is a nonsense to my mind. It is a nonsense. I don't mean that rewilding is a nonsense, but in your garden, you cannot create a wild area in your garden. It just becomes weed infested, and it's so much work involved, and so much thought, skill, and horticultural knowledge to be responsible for. To manage a wildlife garden is one of the hardest things to do. And the fashion design of just calling it rewilding and letting it run wild, two different things. So I think that was going to be going out of fashion because people realise you can't sell a garden that's full of stinging nettles and dandelions. But
which we
can do much better things. Much better things. I mean, Alan Titchmarsh talking about a luminary, great chap. One of a friend of mine, but he's such a wise old head. He really is. And he just said, many of the plants that we want to attract bees and wildlife in the garden, they've come from all over the world. So you don't have to have this fixation for rewilding on things that have only been in England for the last 2,000 years. No, you could have look at it right across the board.
Yeah, there's a current thinking, isn't there, in the gardening world that you do need your native species, but actually with global warming and climate change, it's to have all the other biodiversity of other plants from other parts of the world to make sure that we're in a better and safer place to secure our future.
Yeah, we're going to think about the bees, think about the insects.
Yeah.
And that really is the be all and end all. To create a perfect wildlife garden, you've got to attract wildlife.
Indeed.
I don't mean rabbits and badgers, but you get the insects. Once you get the insects, then you get the birds, and then the whole thing just rocks and rolls.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. And so I take it from that you're not a fan of No Mow May then?
No. In a word, no.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had quite a few discussions on this programme about whether it does benefit the lawn or not, but I think it benefits the dandelions. And
yes.
Oh, it does, yes, it does. But as I said, to do it properly, it's a great art, it really is.
Yes. So my next question, Alan, which, I mean, please feel free not to answer, but is how would you create your perfect wildlife garden? Would you just make sure you've got the right plants which attract those bees and butterflies on their merits as individual plants?
I think to create the perfect wildlife garden, you've got to decide really what you want to attract, and you should really concentrate, I think, on the birds and the bees because they're the important ones. Hedgehogs are wonderful, of course, but not every garden's going to get a hedgehog.
No.
Yeah, a perfect wildlife garden. Yeah, you need a corridor. You definitely need a hole in the fence for that reason. Make it no bigger than a 4 inches or 6 inches. You don't want foxes and badgers trying to get through, but you do want to attract. You do want to attract the little things, the voles and the hedgehogs.
For sure. Yes. The next question, and in view of what's been said, are you a fan of the garden makeover?
The garden makeover. Well, you mean the TV programs?
Yeah, I mean the sort of 24, 48 hour quick fixes.
No, that's absolute nonsense. They were nonsense 25 years ago, and they caused the industry 30 years ago. Caused the industry a lot of problems, the landscape industry, because the television companies just make it look ridiculously easy, and of course you try and copy those garden programs, and it'll fall apart. The garden will fall apart within a week.
Yeah.
You can't build a deck with only one screw. just crazy. I think they're just going for the I don't know, the sort of the entertainment value, nothing at all to do with educating people, and that. No, I'm not a fan at all.
No.
So, I mean, one of the things that we picked up quite a bit is how fake these programs are, in the sense of they put things together that just won't work.
Well, I think one of the most ridiculous ideas they had on one of the programs, they had a pile of turf left over, and obviously over-ordered by far too much for their little project. So they had a wooden lap fence which was between the two gardens.
Yeah.
So they stacked these turfs into a settee against the next door neighbour's fence, and said, what clever people we are. And of course, all you're going to do is rot out next door's fence. And they're showing it on television now. That was just crazy.
Yeah. It's definitely caused some issues, I think, in our industry, hasn't it?
Yeah. So, looking at your garden design, well, your construction work at the Chelsea Flower Show over the years, Alan, any particularly memorable moments of what when you were working on those gardens?
Far too many.
Just a couple then, please.
The most memorable one's got to be the year that for 6 consecutive years we designed and built. No, that's not true. We built 3 gardens each year at Chelsea. 18 Chelsea Show gardens in 6 years.
Wow. Okay.
We built them as contractors, as constructors. And I designed one of those each time. But in 1997, because of a series of situations, I was called upon to, in fact, to design and build 3 gardens at the one show. Because somebody pulled out a big time a few days before the show opened. And that really was something else, because to design 3 gardens, building 3 gardens is not a problem, because I had the staff and I had the equipment and I had the plants and everything else. And if you're going to build 1 garden, you might as well build 2. That's the way we think, because you've got the crew there, so there's not a problem. But 3 gardens, that really was a brain ache. And that was Do It All, Bradstone and Barclays Bank. So I've got a huge amount of publicity from that. It will never happen before. It will never happen again.
And
definitely a unique year.
Definitely.
Yes. And talking about creating your show gardens, where do you get your plants from? Do you have a stock of plants that you use? Or?
I used to have a nursery near to where I live in Petworth. And I had all my Chelsea stock plants there, because you could buy new every year. So if I was building a garden, I would do it on a lump sum. So if somebody wanted to pay me £100 to build a garden, I would spend as much as I wanted on plants, because they were my plants. Yep. So at the end of the show, I'd take them back and put them in stock. So over the years, I created a pretty impressive Chelsea stock plant archive, if you like. I had some wonderful acers. They were 100-year-old acers in 1,000-litre containers. Wow, I've still got them. They're at my son's yard now, and but I don't. No, I've stopped doing Chelsea now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had enough Chelsea stock plants to actually build a garden just as I did in '97. Within 3 or 4 days of being asked to build it.
That's fantastic.
So those were the days.
And did you manage to rent them out to anybody else, like sort of TV sets?
No, I never rented any plants out. Anybody, the way Chelsea works, I mean, obviously there are those commercial people who do rent out plants, so not decrying them at all. But the way I operated at Chelsea was that anybody could borrow anything they wanted as long as they bought it back at the end of the show. And this is the whole ethos, really. At Chelsea, especially Chelsea, we're all working under intense pressure. And so if anybody is, if somebody's bricklayer hadn't turned up, or they run out of sand or cement or whatever, everybody lends each other, borrows from each other. And at the end of the show, as we hand that back whatever we borrowed, and it's a magic place. Magic.
That sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, Chelsea. And likewise, Alan, your own career highlights. I was reading, obviously you worked many times with the late and great Peter Seabrook.
Well, Peter was he was more than late and great. He was a mentor to me. He didn't mean to be, but he was, because I used to try and build gardens that I could sell. If that makes sense. If I would stand out in the crowd and listen to the crowd talking about my gardens, and if somebody in the crowd said, "I want that, I could do that, we need that at home," then I've done my job. If they're standing out in the crowd and I'm listening to negative comments, I know I can't sell it. So I've always built gardens that people want to have. And Peter Rogers was a guy I did a lot of work with at Chelsea, and also was another friend of Peter Seabrook's. Peter Seabrook used to work on the Sunflower Avenue inside the main marquee. I built one garden there with him once, with Peter Rogers. And but Peter was such an important influence, because he wrote more than once in his newspaper about Alan Sargent, who builds real gardens for real people, and he sort of took me under his wing quite a bit there, by promoting me, I suppose, but in a really positive way.
Excellent. Yeah, very well. You could say.
We touched on it earlier about sort of garden designs around the world that you've done. Have you got any highlights that you'd like to share with us? Any countries you preferred working in?
The most fascinating one, without doubt, and this is going back before the nonsense that's going on now, that was in Russia. I mean, I had some amazing experiences working in Russia, because I had a really, really clever interpreter.
Okay.
And I had no idea what was going on at any time, because it was a strange thing. I was put up at 5-star hotels and treated like a king and so on. But I didn't know from one day to the next, or 1 hour to the next, where I was going to be taken next.
Right.
So I was taken around so many different projects, and just to suddenly try and give a take, from the English or the English garden designer. What would you do in this garden? What would you do in this garden? And that was really weird, but it's fascinating. You just arrive in the middle of nowhere. There's a big cleared area of woodland and a house going up, and they say, "Okay, design the garden," and just like that, just what you expect you to conjure up all these ideas. Okay. And it was fascinating, because of course you really haven't got time to even think about it. But I learned to sort of wing it in a way. I remember one particular project. This young lady had 3 or 4 young children, and she had all these heavy muscle men all around her. And I was just asked, "Okay, what am I going to do in this garden?" So I haven't got a clue. But as I just looked around, I could see all these wonderful trees and fir trees and so on. So I had a sudden inspiration about having raised walkways with rope and edging and so on. So trying to describe that to the interpreter, I suddenly came up with the word Indiana Jones. And as soon as I said Indiana Jones, and so I could explain what I was going to do in the garden, and they just clapped their hands with glee. That was it. And it's just fun. It's just inspirational.
Fantastic. I guess it must have been a very hard job for the interpreter, because they probably don't have a clue about half of the plant names.
She was very good. She was she worked in America for about 30 odd years, so she was really switched on. And because she worked for an engineering company, she could speak technical language, and so she didn't. She was excellent.
That's good.
That's good. And Alan, reading through your book, your Confessions of a Gardener, I see that you did a spell as a head gardener.
Well, I always wanted to, when you do Chelsea and so on, you build it, trash it, build it, trash it. And I always fancied looking at the end of my career, and I was only 54 then. I was thinking to myself, I would really love to do something a bit more creative. And I was approached by Goodwood Estates to take on the job as head gardener, but the carrot was they wanted me there, and it's not a five-year agreement. In fact, I was there about 6.5 years to oversee the installation of the Rolls-Royce factory going in at the grounds.
Right.
So I oversaw that with my contractor's hat on, and so I've become part of the historic garden, and also at the same time redeveloped the private gardens. So that was fantastic. It really was a wonderful, wonderful employer. But after 6.5 years, I wanted to go back and do more consultancy work, which is, I hadn't stopped doing that all the time. I was allowed to continue doing my consultancy work. So it was a natural thing to move off at that time. I left there at 60.
And we talked a little bit about climate change a little bit earlier on, Alan, but do you think, are we starting to see the effects of that coming into garden designs in recent years?
I don't know about garden design as such. Yes, a lot of people are looking at doing what they call dry gardens. And I think that going back to right from the early part of this particular pod, talking about water movements, people are being much more aware now of the effects of water and on the ground, either drying it out or causing problems with heave. So, I think now garden designers are thinking much more of how the ground itself physically is moving and how it's reacting. And this is certainly within the Association of Professional Landscapers and Society of Garden Designers, this realization that you've got to look at the ground that you're working on is become really important.
And I guess as a accomplished designer and landscaper, have you got any advice that you'd give to someone thinking about going into your career, doing something like in your career path?
Absolutely. If you've got, you want to become a garden designer, and really, as a career, I strongly suggest that you go and spend 2 or 3 years working with a good landscape company as a landscaper, because unless you understand the requirements, needs, and everything else of the materials that you're working with, the construction elements of what you're working with, you shouldn't be designing gardens. There's no good drawing pretty pictures, because pretty pictures don't work. You've got to understand what it is that you're committing onto paper to make it work.
Very sage
a designer must have knowledge well beyond just drawing pretty pictures.
Yes, absolutely.
That's very sage advice. Thank you.
And Alan, what particular aspects of your career are you most proud of, looking back over the
I suppose the aspects to be proud of. I mean, I'm not a proud person. I told you I'm a gardener, but I think when I founded the Association of Professional Landscapers, that's got to be a career highlight. That was in 1995. It's the most important and influential group of domestic contractors in the world, and run and organised by the HTA. It's difficult, very difficult to get into, but it's a great achievement when you do get into it. And then 2016, I started the Professional Garden Consultants Association, or the PGCA. We get about 50 members. They're all very, very good garden consultants in a whole range of different skill sets. 10 of those are, in fact, expert witnesses. So that's become quite a big thing now. So I suppose those two things. Founding the Landscape Library, which is 2020, which is it's an educational resource that's really going great guns as well. So those three. I think probably starting off. I've always been somebody who's not going to say I wish something would happen. I wish something would happen. If I wanted it to happen, I'd make it happen, which is not an arrogant statement, but I couldn't. I don't want to turn around and say, I wish somebody would do something about it. I've always done it.
Absolutely. Good mantra to work to, isn't it? Yes.
Alan, you've been shipwrecked on a desert island. Which plant or tool would you wish that you had in your pocket or in your suitcase to help you survive on your virtual desert island?
Oh, without question, my Swiss Army knife. Without question. It does everything, including a magnifying glass to light fire and all these various blades and tools and a good pair of tweezers for pulling out thorns. It's a one-man kit,
Survival kit,
without question.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Brilliant.
Fantastic, yeah. And finally, Alan, we usually ask our guests for an amusing plant or related story. However, you've given us so many wonderful recollections of your adventures. Are there any other ones which does particularly stand out in your memory?
I wouldn't. I could go on for hours. I really could. I think the best adventures I had, and I think, I hope it comes over in the book actually, is because I've spent a lot of time talking about the Chelsea show, the Chelsea show gardens behind the scenes. I think with all of those behind the scenes things, if the BBC could make a programme of what we, the contractors, we the garden designers do, the public would absolutely love it. They really, really would, because there's some very, very funny stories there. But they're all personal, and I have mentioned quite a few of them in the book. But I think things change so much. In the early days of Chelsea, when we first went on site there in 1982, it was say 40 years ago. The grounds were still open to the public. You'd have the northern nannies walking around with their charges in their prams and a dog in tow, and the public were allowed until about 10 days before the show opened. So it was life was so much gentler then, much sweeter. It really was.
Yeah. Well, that leads me on to our final little talk here now on your book, Confessions of a Gardener, which also helps to support a fantastic charity, Perennial. That's the Gardeners Royal Benevolent Society. Obviously, you've got connections with that particular charity, Alan.
No, I haven't really got connections apart from the fact that they're APL partners and so on. I just know and love a Perennial, and when I was writing the book, Confessions of a Gardener, I thought, well, really, it's not one of my usual type of books, which are management. So I thought, okay, now I decided to pay £4 per copy to Perennial, and that's the deal I've got with them. Excellent. So they have got a stock in their shops and on their website, and for every copy you buy, that they'll get £4, and you can get hold of it through my website, which is www.alansargent.co.uk.
Perfect.
Brilliant. And it is a great book. Thank you so much for writing it. It really gave me some giggles. It was a good one.
Lots of lovely anecdotes and lots of confessions, as the title says, Alan, which is great. Thank you very much, Alan, for your time today on Dig It. We've really enjoyed chatting with you, and we've learnt so much in the way of garden building. Put it all together.
Thanks so much. Invite me back whenever you like.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan.
Bye then.
Bye-bye. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.